those of you that are not in our Zoom room today, this is December the 13th, and we are having a conversation today about your event profit. And this is really an important, if you saw my video today, it has been really important to me because not only about the money exchanged, or if you're in a nonprofit, the money that you are generating from your events. Fundraisers are a really big lifeblood, or the lifeblood for many organizations. And we get stuck sometimes thinking about the money part of our ROI, or our return on investment at events. And what I've come to know is that, especially coming through what I experienced as burnout in my early 20s, and the pressure and the drive to make the money to continue in an organization, or to continue the programs that we're working on, it's really important that we look at the money, but we also look at the energy that we're spending. We look at those things that our team are investing, maybe with our donors. How is everybody lending themselves to this event? And how we determine our ROI is we have to back everything up and actually understand what is our goal for the event. Why are we putting this event on anyway? And in a lot of cases with a nonprofit event, I've heard in the past a lot of teams where they say, oh, that event wasn't worth it. We didn't make that 10,000 or that 100,000 or whatever your goal was for the event. And they feel like they've missed out. And the conversation became more about, well, what were you trying to accomplish? Were you trying to generate awareness? Were you trying to actually raise some funds? Were you in a space where it mattered that your team was actually getting to know each other better? So this conversation is important to me because profit, or our return on what we're investing, what happens if you're willing to share? I am recording right now, so welcome to all of you that have just joined us. When you think about your event and you think about how you're actually showing up to that event, what would make it worth it for you, for that, to actually run that event, to pull your team together, to invest what you needed to financially, to get sponsors rallied around that event? What would make it worth it for it to actually, for you to invest that kind of time? I have a workshop that I call Clearview, and it's really about getting super clear on it. Clear is the word clear, and then I have VIEW, if I'm spelling it right. So setting your vision, what is your investment, how are you engaging people in your event, and the last piece of that is what makes it worth it. And so I'm so excited to introduce Joanne tonight, because she has had how many decades? 4 decades?
Yeah, 3 decades, 30 years. Yeah.
A lot of time around the block of working with nonprofits, and now you're a nonprofit coach, and I have loved learning more about your work. And you and I are relatively new friends, and I love your approach. And for those of you that don't know Joanne, I did interview her for my podcast, so that's already, is it live? Yes, it is live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can take a look at her podcast, which just came out a week or two ago. And we also did a cool little live on LinkedIn about, what was it? Are your events dead or alive?
Yeah.
And, a really relevant topic after COVID. We've all kind of survived. So I would love to just pass it over to Joanne. And I know, Joanne, before we hit sort of open the door and hit record today, you were mentioning that as you go through the presentation, you might be open to having some Q&A throughout the presentation, not just at the end. So that's still cool with you?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Because, well, as we go through, okay, let me back up. Hi, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Joanne Toller, and I started back in 1994. Was my favorite auntie. She worked for an organization and invited me on to help volunteer with her, and then that ended up me getting a contract to work there and then getting another contract and another contract. So for the first 10 years of my career, I did fundraising events. Um, I had a partner, and it was actually events and awareness. We did media and events, and it was wonderful. And then we had the big crash in 2008. So I guess it was over 10 years. And I went back to just fundraising, which was wonderful. I was able to really work with a lot of different organizations, become a CFRE, and now I just mostly coach. So my presentation, I even did slides for you guys. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen. All right. So, and I think this one is a no-brainer. We all know that events can help us with greater awareness, especially if we get some media coverage. And we're going to talk about media coverage and actually some quantify, like some value that is in that, word of mouth. But one thing I did want to talk about is social media amplification. So when we're doing an event, if your social media is done well and you do that keyword optimization, you're utilizing a hashtag strategy, the algorithm has a really good idea of who you are and knows who to put your content in front of. But then you run an event, and I'm going to use an example of say a pet rescue, where the algorithm knows you're a pet rescue. The algorithm knows who is interested in pet rescues. So you're doing great on social media. But now you run an event that's, say, a pet Halloween costume. And now you're posting content and you're optimizing keywords around that. You're optimizing hashtags around that. Well, the algorithm's going to pick up on that and put you in front of a whole new audience that maybe didn't even hear of you. And then you also have user-generated content. So, for example, if I'm at your event and I'm having a great time and I snap a selfie and put it up on my social media, well, I've got about 5,000 followers. Of those, about 500 are going to see that post. And according to my social blue book, which is assigns a value to that, that's another $100 right there in value. So with the awareness in your social media, I don't know that a lot of organizations really capture that value of what the reach is worth and what that user generated content is worth. And as well, some other math that I think is fascinating, because I'm kind of a geek and I love numbers and data, is your email database. So if you're running an event and you're feeding people into your email database and you're capturing them and then nurturing them through your email marketing or email fundraising, then there's a value to that. So with nonprofits, typically they have about 4,000 people in their database. Of those 4,000, they have I think it's about a 28% open rate for their emails. They have really good open rates. And then of that, there's about 5,500 average a year in revenue generated by those donors. So that equates to about $100 or $1.33 per person in their database. So now if we're doing an event and we have 550 people at our event and we manage to get them all into our donor database, that's another $750. So there's value in that. And then increased web traffic would be another one. So how about you guys? How have you seen greater awareness that relates to these hidden values in your event?
Maybe I'll just name one quick one, but sometimes I would invite sponsors that weren't, or potential sponsors that weren't quite putting the dollars on the table yet, creating an experience for them, almost to showcase for the next time round or for other events, just that they would be able to meet the team and be on site specifically to be in the energy and understand the value of the event, sort of with their own eyes. And so that was an expense. But at the end of the day, and I'm not sure how you'd put the dollars and cents around that necessarily, but it was really effective around having the conversation about next time or what else we could be doing together, even though up front it felt like, oh, like we can't offer all these free tickets, but we would just actually build a plan around bringing them into the event.
Yeah. And having that key person, because that leads into the next slide, is having that key person. Of course, it's not sliding. I hate technology. It works great on my end. There we go. Cultivating prospect leads. So this is where it works for not just charity events, and I know this is focused on nonprofit fundraising events, but for business events as well. I had done it was a third party charity golf tournament for a client. And every time I went to them with these amazing ideas where they could increase the funds that they raised, because they raised about 100,000, but I saw so much potential to raise more money, they would shoot me down and say no. And the reason no is because that wasn't where their value was. Yes, they were doing it for a charity, but their value was in the leads that they would generate, in the relationships they were building on that golf course, and the deals they were going to make a month, 6 months down the road. So this, for those of us doing fundraising events, is that relationship building where we're reducing our acquisition costs, because you're having an event, you've got your prospective donors there, you're talking to them, you're having that face-to-face interaction, you're engaging them and finding out what really makes them tick. And then I added something here at the bottom about those referral opportunities, that when we're at an event and we're chatting with a prospective donor, it's about asking them, who else should we be talking to? We're not necessarily asking them for a donation or asking them to ask their friends. It's just in that conversation, who else do you know that we should be talking to? And how that, like, I had to do a fundraising event in a town where I knew nobody. And luckily I got hooked in with the mayor's wife, and she was lovely. She's like, you should talk to this person and that person, but don't talk to this person. She's awful. And then so I would go and talk to all those people, and then they would say, oh, you should talk to so and so and so and so. So it just kept going outwards and outwards and outwards. And there's so much value in that, that are at our event, having, like what Lisa had mentioned, making sure to have that person who's there to work on these value pieces, who's there to talk to the prospects, talk to the donors, talk to the customers, and really nurture those relationships along. Same goes for current clients or current donors. Again, just building those relationships, which can have all of these benefits, that better donor retention, so that we don't have to fight attrition. It costs less to keep a donor happy than it does to go and get another donor. And how quite often it'll increase our donation size. I went to an event for an organization that I've been familiar with for years and had never donated. And I walked out of there a monthly donor, and I'm still a monthly donor. It just because of meeting them face to face and just really witnessing things on my own. And then it also provides an opportunity to be involved a little bit more in mission. And I don't want to sound too fundraisy here, because I know there's a few people that are more corporate, but in the fundraising world, and we talk about our fundraising pipeline, and true stewardship is about mission involvement. It's about taking our donors and bringing them in, and making them part of our mission, and events are fantastic for that.
Well, I was just going to mention just on the last one where you had the reputation management or something like
Yeah.
that. That one, or yeah, enhanced reputation, because you were speaking about social media as well, and this idea that there is an integration now, that it's not just, and you and I are similar in age, and sort of we've been at this a long, long time, and so that was something we had to almost reserve for either face-to-face meetings with a client or with a donor, or on site. And it was really a key of building this into the event. Like the brand management, and what are they going to see on the tables, and what kind of entertainment. I know, Janice, that's your world. But this reputation piece, I think, has exploded now, where it's, I don't want to say it, well, it's more complex now, where we add social media and we add other people's voices. And so I think in that donor stewardship, it's even more important now, I think, to really look at how are we creating relationships over time, and then how that actually builds into our reputation and building that trust as well. So I just wanted to touch on that because it does, I think we have a whole other world here of reputation management within an event that maybe we didn't before. So,
No, no. And people attending your events or people supporting your organization nowadays look at social media and make judgment based on social media. If your profile picture doesn't quite fit or it's unreadable and there's no engagement, you have no following and the posts are boring and that's how they see you, right? Especially our younger, our next gen donors, that's exactly how they'll see you. Yeah. I'm a social media geek too, as well as a data geek.
awesome. Yeah, feel free to keep going to the next slide. That's great.
Okay. And then volunteer engagement. I think that we don't see enough value in volunteers sometimes, or at least when, okay, I'll speak for myself. Back when I was doing events, I know I didn't at the time see the value in the volunteers. And I know a lot of organizations struggle with, should we ask our volunteers for money or not? I mean, they're already giving their time, but what it really does is it shows them that culture of giving. It shows them how important that it is, and many volunteers will donate as a result. It also involves them in the mission, and it reduces the acquisition cost for volunteers because now they're more committed and they're more loyal to your cause. And I don't have any like real value on this one, but I wanted to throw it in there because I think it's very important. I've just seen the power of it come out over the last few years. Um, and then any media coverage that you get. So for those corporate events, I remember doing this years ago where we would take the ad buys for a corporation that was partnering with us. And as a charity, we would go out and buy the ads because we would get double. We would get a 2-for-1 deal being a nonprofit. So we would use that in a lot of our sponsorship packages that will double their impact in terms of their ad buys. And then if you're doing things like public service announcements or news releases and you have the media out at your events, there is a direct value to that. My old business partner used to have a sheet that had, if we get a 30-second PSA or a 15-second PSA, this is what it's worth. If we get a little quarter-page ad, she had all that value nailed down. And in some cases, it was $25,000. This was what, 20 years ago. And then, oh, sorry, Lisa, you can say something?
Oh, I was just going to mention in that too, because I think this is where, for all of us that are working with an executive or a board, we have a role also to educate them on what the value is, because quite often we'll put an ad, or I was going to say put an ad in the newspaper. That's a long time ago. We'll book an ad, or we'll have some kind of a media relationship, and I used to get the pat on the back and say, oh, that's really great that we're on the radio and that they're doing this live on location or whatever. That was back in the old radio days. But they wouldn't necessarily understand the value of it. They thought it was kind of cool. But I think that that's where we become educators with our teams around not just with media coverage. And now we could translate that into social media. And I think in all of these, I really love how you have this broken out, because it really gives us a bit of a checklist that we can go through and say, what are those things that we either haven't tapped into yet or we're currently tapped into. And I was doing some budgeting for an organization once, and we started to add that media line in as far as value around the event, and it kind of blew the executive away how much not just perceived endorsements we were getting, but actual ad time, lots of sponsorship, but they had kind of written it off before. It just wasn't even a conversation. So I love that you've added the media coverage in here as well.
Well, even with the email one, I just couldn't do all the math today. Too much math for me. But if you look at the lifetime value, right, if you go deeper into the math, so you take those new people that you put in, and yes, maybe they're only worth $1.33 at this particular time, keeping in mind that we as a sector don't perform nearly as well as the as businesses do, right? If you look at our typical engagement rate or response rate or click-through rate, we're at the bottom end because we really don't have time to do this like the professionals and learn to do this professionally. So if we are really maximizing it and then we look at that lifetime value, it's worth so much more than just the $750 for the year. It can equate to thousands. Uh, and then with media coverage too, I know we were really good at this. Where anytime we had a promotions or anytime we had a shooter come out and film something, or a journalist, or we talked to an assignment editor, we built a relationship. We were sending them thank yous. We were updating them after the event. We were sending them quarterly reports. We just kept that relationship going because it led to partnership opportunities where I could phone up and say, we have something coming up and we really need a media sponsor. And they would put it on the promotions coordinator's desk or help us get in there. And then, getting in and building those relationships with the promotions coordinator. And then nowadays with online engagement, that with so many media organizations having event listings on their website or just throwing their PSAs up on their website, there's a lot more exposure to be had these days. Okay. And then in-kind donations, again, we all know that there is a value with in-kind donations. But what I wanted to share was the nurturing towards a monetary donation. And Lisa, this is like what you talked about earlier. So I have a client that we worked on their year-end campaign, and we're not asking for money. We're not asking for any money. We're asking for hygiene kits. And we're targeting corporations because a lot of companies like to get together in the holiday season and they want to, do something. So the company buys all this stuff and they package it. And then they come on down and they drop it off, and there's a little selfie station so they can get their picture and put it on their social media. Meanwhile, the development director is there when they drop off and talking to them and reporting back and building these relationships so that next year we can start to incorporate monetary donations into that ask. So as we're going through and we're doing our events, I remember doing with our AV guys at one of our events, I treated them so well. I would sneak them meals. I would check in on them. I would, really took good care of our AV guys because next year I was hoping that they would even do a partial sponsorship, right? Those relationships and nurturing that so that you can, perhaps move it into a sponsorship.
And there's just in the chat here, Trixie says that they did this. One of their sponsors ran a tabletop exercise for the pre-conference. So that's such a great example where people want to be hands-on these days. I find that I was in Montreal speaking about a month ago or so, and this was for association leaders. And one of my favorite pieces was one of the tourism, believe it was from Markham, but they had partnered with a youth organization. And so there was one area of this conference, the conference hall, where you would go and you could fill in or fill up the bags, and it was going to the youth that were either in transition or struggling, and you could write a note, and it was just beautifully set up. But that was one of the most inspiring and I think probably memorable experiences for conference goers. Like, you have the trade show and you have a lot of sales going on because it's important that you get people booking their conference in your city. But that one really stood out, and I heard people talking about it at dinner, and when we get up for breakfast, and then they were meeting other people, and this beautiful sort of charity or social cause teamed with the money that was coming from this tourism organization. It just felt like that was such a beautiful marriage. And and it's not forever that they'll be necessarily together, but what a beautiful showcase, I think, for those that were at the conference.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love that idea. Too bad I don't do events anymore.
Oh yeah. I'll rope you in now and then. Just kidding. You're too far away for me to rope you in.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm hiding. Uh,
For those of you that haven't, Joanne, do you mind sharing where you're coming from today?
no, so I'm at the just above Mexico, right on the border of California and Arizona, tucked in that corner in the middle of nowhere.
And she's here with us tonight, so yeah, I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Wild donkeys here. It's crazy.
Oh my goodness. Well, you're coming in loud and clear, so this is awesome. Yeah, feel free to keep going through.
Yep, yep. Okay, so I saved kind of what I feel is the best for last, and that's the data. The data is so valuable nowadays that our events provide amazing opportunities to do data mining. So that's where we are having those conversations with our prospective donors or prospective clients. And we're getting an idea for their motivations, for their behaviors, their demographics. We're getting all of that valuable data that we can now turn around and use when we're creating any of our materials or use to make what these data-driven decisions. So I work with a lot of clients, and the one thing that always stops them dead in their tracks is when I say, what does the data say about that? They don't know how to respond to me because they don't know what the data says. And it should be driving all of our decisions. It really should. So if you're running an event and you're promoting it everywhere and you're looking at your click-through rates, and your click-through rates are phenomenal, people are interested, but somehow they're not following through when they get to that landing page, then you know there's a problem with the landing page. Or if nobody's clicking through to your event, then you know maybe there's a problem with your promotional materials, that there's just so much value in data, and actually at the events it's about finding out who our attendees are. Who are they really?
Could I ask you just a question on this one? Because I have, not only do they not have data, but there's some pushback and they feel like we don't have a person for that, or that's not something that we traditionally do, or something that we'll take care of down the road. How do you experience that pushback? And are there ways that you encourage them to start somewhere? Like, is there a way to get them started on this track without going sort of full on, all in, hire the full time, more than full time person to do it?
I have a meme that I use.
Of course you
I work
do.
that with my clients. It's a picture of what the internet used to look like. So I don't know how old we all are here, but I mean, remember those old websites, right? And I was around when the internet came out, and charities were saying, I think it's a fad, or they didn't have the money to invest, and they got so far behind the curve. And then social media came onto the scene in 2004. So by 2007, if you didn't have a Facebook account or a Twitter account, you were obsolete. And there were still so many charities that said I couldn't do it, like they couldn't do it. So I just kind of talk about that. Like, how far behind this curve do you really want to get? Right. It's
Well, and I think for some nonprofits, they're so mission driven, storytelling driven. And what has helped me, as I say, I'm not the numbers person, but what's helped me is thinking of the data as a story that I can be telling. And so, or understanding it as a story.
Yeah, I love that because I used to work with an organization where the director of development was a senior, and by senior I mean like senior 76. And she was still working, but it was a senior serving organization. She spoke so well to that sector, but could not speak to millennials. And then when
Mm.
I came to her with ideas that millennials would really like, and messaging that millennials would really like, she that was a no-go. And I had to leave that contract because that's what the data was saying. Right?
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard truth in some ways, and that we push it aside long enough that it almost feels irrelevant until it's something that now you're so behind, or there's a disconnect, I'll say, between what you're trying to say and what you're trying to do and who you're trying to attract. I was working with an organization that their average donor was 80 something, 81, 82, like literally like in that, end of, I don't want to say end of life period, but there was a lot of estate planning, but there wasn't really a planning for the future or for the future of the organization. And where are those people? And so I think that this is a very interesting one that we could do a whole session, whole another couple of hours on just the data. And then Trixie is saying in the chat here that data storytelling is a skill, and a little happy face. Is that something that you do, Trixie, that you're skilled in?
One of the things I get asked to do a lot, not necessarily with just events, but like things that the Isaac does to help promote its impact. So, like, how many member organizations do we have? How much gold are we helping protect by being an information sharing center for people to collaborate on? How one of the data mining things we're doing right now is we're trying to find out if being part of a Isaac would mean that you're more cyber resilient, and therefore cyber insurance companies might give you a discount. Like, you have a fire alarm in your house, you get a lower premium, or your house insurance. Same idea. So we're using that data to try and produce even more value that we bring to our members.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, because even with our social media, that's that whole blue book. That's the idea behind it, is it looks at all the data in terms of your reach and your analytics, your demographics, and spits out a value at you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's something I'd like to learn more from you, Joanne,
I
moving
love data.
forward too. Yeah,
I do. I do.
absolutely.
And I just have one more slide, and this is another big thing that I'm really seeing happening in the States. And typically when it happens in the States, it's going to come to Canada real quick. And that's the importance of social proof, right? That having the testimonials, the Google reviews, the Facebook reviews, that this is so important now for us nonprofits. And I wanted to do a little webinar on Google reviews, but it just nobody was interested. And it's so important. How could you not want to do a webinar on Google reviews?
I know why my
Again,
company wouldn't do it. We focus on LinkedIn. Like, all of the mining companies, they all use LinkedIn. So if you're not on LinkedIn, then you're kind of a nobody. But Google is a totally different animal, and they don't go there. They want to see your LinkedIn profiles and stuff.
yeah, yeah. Well, it matters for the search engine rankings too, in terms of, if because people do look up charities to donate to that they're interested in. Maybe their mother was affected by breast cancer and now they want to do something. They're going to Google nonprofits that support breast cancer. So are you going to be number one in the Google, or are you going to be number 20 in the Google? Because the first couple of ones are the ones that get the donation, and Google reviews, social proof, all that kind of stuff really help with it. That's why I had website views, like a website interaction on that other slide too. That can really help your performance. And that's all I had.
That's awesome. Let's give her a hand. Well, this has been a real joy. Thank you, Joanne. I think for many of us that either if you're watching this now or if you're going to be watching this after the fact, there is a lot here. So take a look at each one of those slides, and I would love it if you were able to maybe even bring that up with your team and say, where are we at in this particular category, or in this category, or in this category? And when we find the gaps, I think, and you'll probably say that too, Joanne, but it's not about beating ourselves up like, why didn't we start Twitter? Oh no, it's not Twitter anymore. No. Why didn't we do whatever, 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever? That's not the point. I think the point is finding the gap that we feel like we're energized and we're ready to go with, and then bringing someone like Joanne to the table, where you can maybe help them sort through, like, where are you today, and what is it that you're capable of in the next whatever, so that you can get your, dip your toe into something that maybe you haven't done before. And that's where this gets super exciting, because then we start to either find somebody that fills the gap, because they're like, oh good, they're working on this, and that's something that I've done. I've seen that so many times when we explore an avenue and somebody says, oh, I've been doing that for 5 years and this is my other job, or my daughter does that, or whatever. And then you start to see the magic happen, I think, if we allow ourselves to go there sometimes too. So thank you so much for that presentation, Joanne. That was fantastic. I wish you peace and joy and just a really fantastic connection with those you care about. So thank you again for being here tonight.